Hello and welcome back to episode 14 of the Hackable You podcast, your bi-weekly dose of cybersecurity news, the topic of the week and our secrets from the SOC. And this week I am sad to report that Alex is on holiday. He is not here, we've given him a break. He is currently doing his staycation in the UK or doing something. And Alex, we really hope that when you listen to this back, you've had a nice rest and time away. But the good news is, as a step-in host for the week, we've brought back our favourite guest so far, which is Ollie. Ollie, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me back as well.
Always good to have the double trouble Lacey Reid brothers here. Well, one Lacey Reid, the other one's a Reid. But Will, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm good.
Good.
Glad it's the weekend.
Oh, I know. Well, I'll tell you what, I've been on holiday as well, but not gone anywhere. And I have no idea what day it is. It's a Friday, it's a Wednesday. I have no idea what day it is, but we bounce through, and I'll be back at work before we know it, back into lockdown or whatever's going to happen next. Right, let us jump into the cybersecurity news for this episode. So, first up is my favourite of the week. And it's my favourite because it's an emerging trend that I think is going to be something we'll see coming to the boil over the next few months or so. And this is that QR codes are now QR codes are representing a high level of risk to users and people for their day-to-day lives. Now, if you don't know what a QR code is, essentially it is a digital image that are placed on stickers and posters and things that most modern-day smartphone cameras can read, and they will process and publish information right into the palm of your hand. A good example of this is you could be at a bus stop with a QR code, you scan the code and it brings up the bus times, or something very, very similar. Now, some researchers have done some digging and they've seen a risk posed to QR codes, and a lot of this is because of the new track and trace applications and services due to the coronavirus. For most bars, pubs, restaurants, if you're going to go and sit in and have a drink or a meal, you have to scan the QR code to say that you were there for the whole track and trace program to work successfully. And these researchers have basically said that there is a trend that is growing of malicious use of QR codes. Guys, what's your first impressions on this here? Do you think it's going to be a problem?
I don't think so on any mass scale. I think you might see some, the occasional one here and there, but I think they're just, too overt to try and get them into place and stuff. I don't know. I'll settle at being surprised if anything kind of large scale major happens with them, but it's really interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I've seen examples of these used before for some really sketchy purposes as well. I remember a system that I was reviewing a few years ago, and they were using QR codes as like a provisioning sort of tool. So you could take any device, scan a QR code, and the idea was it was meant to provision a Android mobile device as a corporate device. So it would go and download the required installers for all the different corporate software, and then it would join it to the corporate SSL VPN. Very convenient, fantastic idea. Unfortunately, forgetting that if you leave that QR code anywhere, then anybody can make any Android device a corporate device just by scanning it. So I think the implications of them haven't been thought through. The other one that I'm thinking of actually is there was a recent bug, I think, in Firefox Mobile for Android, which was to do with Android intents, which is where an app can hand off to another app. So your app that you write on Android can tell Android to open another app to, present the user with the right information. And there was a bug in Firefox that allowed sort of any for anyone on a local network to find those Android devices that were running that vulnerable version of Firefox, and then to get it to launch a specific intent. So you could get it to launch a browser, with an exploit, for example, and it would exploit the Android handheld. So all those sorts of things I think are all possible, but again, it's a bit like the USB stick in the car park example. You have to get someone to actually
scan it. Yeah, you actually got to
scan
go
it
forth and do it
first.
first. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there about some of the things that QR codes can do, but at a really high level, some of the risks that were called out in this research were you can add contacts to users' phones, you can send texts and emails, and even potentially make payments. You can follow people's social media profiles, but and adding in kind of preferred Wi-Fi profiles, which is the real kind of, I guess, initial foothold type intrusion that might be possible because of this. But I think really simply, and what I think we'll see more of, but not in the sense of a mass adoption of it, will just be simple redirects. Scan URL rather than going to the Weatherspoons login page. It's going to take you over to the fake one, which looks identical because of a simple bit.ly URL redirect, and all of a sudden you've got some form of credential harvesting going on. And arguably, there's not much that organisations can do to stop against this. I think the advice that the research came out with were two primary things that one should do, right? The first one was make sure you check that the QR code is from a trusted source. Now, I honestly wouldn't be able to sit here and tell you whether a QR code came from a trusted source or not. They're not that popular for businesses to use for me to sit there and go, oh yeah, I trust that's from the Dog and Duck or whatever. And the second one was all around bit.ly. So bit.ly is the URL shortening services that takes, www.hackableu.com/podcast and puts it into a very simple bit.ly.ly/podcast, and it allows redirects to happen. And that's the real issue here. It's free. You can see lots of simple redirects and that. And to a user's eye, they're not going to maybe notice the kind of the URL redirect that's going on. But no, I agree, guys. I think yes, this is a problem. I find it really interesting because it does jump on the bandwagon of track and trace and the whole NHS COVID-19 schemes that are there to protect people. And again, it just goes to show that attackers will abuse anything that's meant for good for their own gain. And the second news item for this week relates to a Russian hacker responsible for the LinkedIn, Dropbox and Formspring hacks has been sentenced to 7 years in prison in the US. So 8 years ago, a guilty verdict was passed against a Russian hacker from Moscow being held responsible for stealing details of circa 200 million users across the three platforms. LinkedIn, as we know, the popular professional social network, Dropbox being cloud storage, and a defunct now social media called Formspring. This goes to show that cybersecurity convictions are being looked at harshly. No longer are they kind of swept under the carpet or not really looked on in the light that they have done before. The US are really coming down hard on holding people to account for this, even though this happened 8 years ago. What I find quite interesting in this specific case is the prosecution asked for 12 years and the defence were able to get that down to 7. The charges were for trafficking devices and selling stolen data and a whole load of other kind of nefarious things that go along with kind of hacking. However, one of the things that they held on to here was that there was evidence that the Russian hacker, who I'm not even going to try and pronounce their name because if you can see it, I'm going to butcher it. Will, you're going to have to give it a go for me, given that I think you're the closest person to understanding the Russian language in this trio here. But anyway, there's evidence to suggest that the hacker was working with unnamed co-conspirators of a Russian cybercrime forum for selling the data, and that's really what they came down hard on here. Guys, what do you make of this? A 7-year sentence for a crime that happened 8 years ago.
I would probably say, probably not harsh enough, but then, I would probably say that about
because you're an ex-copper. Guilty until proven innocent, right?
Yeah, he was only arrested. He travelled to the Czech Republic in October, and then was extradited in 2018. So,
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Dave, no idea he didn't do a Julian Assange.
Yeah, exactly. Went the other way. Yeah.
No, I mean, my natural thing would be, you should have got banged up for longer, but like you say, I'm a little bit more ruthless when it comes to sentencing than most, perhaps.
Oh, I mean,
I don't know if it deters people though, and especially not kind of young cyber criminals. I'm not convinced that harsher sentences work in general anyway. But but I think I'm not sure if this will send a message or not. If it will make people think twice about whether they would do something like this. I think probably in the moment, I'm going to guess, I'm just taking a guess here, that most young cyber criminals think that they're much more intelligent, they've got better skills, better tools than law enforcement, and they have the ability to, remain hidden and not be tracked. But that's just kind of my rough view of probably where they sit on this.
And technology and cybersecurity attitude has changed like tenfold over the last 8 years. So back then, LinkedIn, etc., their real focus here was growing user bases hard, fast, really quickly, with less of an appetite for secure by design or security first. And I think it was just easier to facilitate these attacks. One could simply do a little bit of reconnaissance, stumble across potentially a known vulnerability or to a bug, or phish someone, and bang, they're into getting lots of information, lots of details. That's what makes it so easy. Like you said today, people and young hackers are more technically able. Their ability to mask their locations, to hide where they're coming from, and to obfuscate everything is far greater than what it was 8 years ago. And I think that's a fact. So, I agree with you. Harsher sentencing, I don't think is the answer. However, it does give you food for thought around, okay, well, if you are able to catch somebody who is using these new methods, potentially doing something more dangerous, then are they really going to care? They've probably done what they wanted to do by then. They've probably earned their cash from it, and 7 years, I don't know whether it goes to show as a real threat or a deterrent to anyone.
Yeah, it's difficult to tell, isn't it? I guess some of these people could have made considerable amounts of money in their careers, and as you say, within 7 years, if they spend 7 years in prison, then the rest of their life living off the proceeds of some of the work they've done, and they're not going to lose those skills in prison, but also they're not going to be doing anything potentially positive while they're sat rotting in a prison either. So. Yeah. It's very difficult to get that balance between who can be rehabilitated as a criminal and who is so dangerous that they need to be locked up for society's protection.
Exactly. A massive debate that we could easily talk about for a long time, right? About the pros and cons of prison, for sure.
There are going to be internet connected machines in prison, most likely. Okay, they might be severely locked down, but
come on.
They might think that, but
prison IT systems.
You've got a guy there who was able to break into some large organisations who should have had fairly impressive security measures. And I think that's the thing that always gets me about this stuff is there seems to be little focus on actually looking at why these companies kind of did get compromised, and why, exactly as you say, they weren't prioritising security, they were prioritising growth of their company over data security. So. We can't be too surprised when this stuff happens.
Will, I really want you to try and give the pronunciation of this guy's name a go. Hold on.
No pressure.
The wife is home. I can always go and get her to come and pronounce it.
I think you might have to do that. Right, hold on. I'm going to put it in the chat. Hold on. Wait. I'll tell you, I'll give it a go first. I'll make myself look like a tit before we do it. Right, so I've put it in the chat, right? So that to me is Yevgeny Alexandrovich Niklewin.
I'd say you get away with that on a conference call, Ed.
Yes.
I think it is definitely Yevgeny Alexandrovich Niklewin. Yeah, you're probably right, roughly. Should we get an answer from my wife?
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, I want to know that. Just in case I ever come across anyone with that name.
What am I pronouncing?
Yes.
Evgeny Alexandrovich Nikulin.
Wow, I got that so wrong.
Completely wrong. It was so far off.
Oh dear. I need to learn some Russian. Jesus, that was embarrassing. Cool. All right, and let's move on to our last news item, which is actually a sad one. Not sorry to dull the tone, guys, but police in Germany have launched a homicide investigation after a lady sadly died at Düsseldorf University Hospital after her treatment was delayed due to a ransomware attack. Now, Will and Ollie, I know you guys, we had a quick talk about this just before we hit record. Apart from this being obviously a very tragic and sad case, and from my understanding, the first one where a death has been linked to ransomware in the media, what's your guys' take on this? Do you think this is going to become more frequent? Have we got to really start to act very quickly to avoid this from happening again?
I think that there's a couple of issues here. I mean, ultimately, hospitals are becoming, more reliant on IoT devices and technology in general. That's, nothing that is going to go away, and if anything, it's going to become more and more important. and more, integrated into our hospitals. That kind of technology that can talk to other areas of the hospital, that is totally, already partially in place. So I'd argue, and even more on the way to, the machines that can work with other machines in order to keep you alive is something that we all look forward to from from an improvement in medical healthcare. But that does bring those risks across.
What's quite interesting about this specific case is that the group that were responsible for the ransomware reached out to the hospital to give the decryption keys out for free to ensure that they weren't impacted, which I guess goes to show that it is so easy to be caught in the crossfire for ransomware. It's an attachment, an email. It is so easy just to kind of get this on your machine. And if you're not well protected, then unfortunately the results can be deadly.
Yeah, I found it, like I say, really interesting that actually they weren't the hospital wasn't actually the intended target here. So it was actually like an affiliated university who the attackers were actually trying to target. And as you say, they gave them the encryption key. But there are tons of examples from the US. I think it's just on overload at the moment of healthcare providers and hospitals that are being compromised with ransomware. And as you say, having to pay. Some of them choosing to pay the ransoms. I think to me this comes back to I think lots of people are slowly coming to the realization that what matters most in IT systems now is availability.
Yeah, sadly.
I think and I think actually that's been really sorely overlooked. Over the years we've kind of got to the point where we've become accepting that things are down. This is down for 10 minutes, that's down for 10 minutes. But in examples like this, those kind of systems have the literal impact, over people's lives. And, if emergency operations can't take place because the system is, because the hospital is completely run by IT, or they're so reliant on the IT systems that they don't have paper backups that are effective enough, then, that's a huge problem. So for me, this problem isn't going to go away. And as you say, it's far too easy to be done over by this. It can just be something very simple that, that happens. Quite why hospital systems are connected to the internet anyway is beyond me. I mean, just literally take them off the internet, put them on a system where you've whitelisted what people have access to, and keep that really strict. And even things like email. Put your email clients on a Citrix server that isn't connected to the same network as your your patient processing systems and the systems that they use in operating theatres and stuff like that. Have them on a separate domain. I mean, it smells all of this of really poor architecture and not thinking about how to really segregate your systems so that one owned system doesn't take out your entire organisation.
Correct if I'm wrong here, but I don't actually remember when WannaCry hit the NHS in 2017. I don't remember any direct links between patient deaths and the ransomware ever being announced, unless you're aware of any. And I think either that shows the NHS, which doesn't surprise me, actually had a really good paper-based system and a way of working, or that it just went unreported, or maybe the ransomware wasn't seen as a bit of a scapegoat and excuse. I don't know, but
I expect it's probably, like you say there, around the fact that much of the NHS is not particularly, I don't want to say smart, but it's not using those
digitalized
kind of interconnected devices. Yeah, it is very still, at least from my experience, my limited experience with the NHS, it's still very, paper based, which is probably the right thing at the moment.
Yeah, I think some of the trust systems. Again, I'm not an expert on NHS systems at all, so please nobody write in and say that I'm talking rubbish, because I might be talking rubbish. But I think there's a couple of things. A lot of the NHS systems aren't necessarily connected to each other directly, so they're kind of, although they have integrations on the back end, they're not necessarily all running on the same platform, part of the same domain, all that kind of stuff. But I do remember that they had some emergency departments that had to cancel operations and stuff like that, and inpatient departments that did. But I think they had sort of slack elsewhere in the system to transfer those patients to hospitals that hadn't been affected.
And the last thing, which actually arguably links really well into this, Ollie, is what you mentioned earlier around US sanctions now against paying ransomware, and how actually if you end up paying the ransom, you could be now held to account and even prosecuted for it.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting, this one. So the US Treasury have come out and said that companies that pay ransomware payments to cybercriminal gangs have or may kind of fall foul of US sanctions if that group is part of a country or a place where there are US sanctions against transferring money. And I think it's quite interesting because I think a lot of companies rely on this sort of last ditch resort, when they realize they've got no backups, when they realize that, in hospital situation they've got people that they have to treat, or in the shareholder situation, the investors are on the phone asking what's going on, in a very polite way, obviously. I think companies kind of look to this and think, well, at the end of the day, we could pay. We know it's going to take us months, maybe years, to recover from this in reality without doing that. And so they see it as a sort of viable get out clause.
It's a cheaper option.
Yeah,
for a lot of cases.
And I think a lot of companies don't recognise, and it's that societal impact. They don't recognise that their money is clearly not going to legitimate, sources and means, and they have no idea where that money is being used and what it is financing.
I don't see companies as people's jobs and livelihoods. They see them as they are more. It's just another. It's like shoplifting today. People are more than happy to shoplift because they feel like there's no victim with that. And it's exactly the same thing in companies. People don't feel that by doing ransomware against a company, they don't feel like there's any victim there.
Yeah, if the company goes bust and people lose jobs and made redundant, and the kind of domino snowball effect off the back of that, they unlink themselves from it because they're so, I guess, distant from that real tactile response they can see. Fantastic. All right, well, that wraps up the cybersecurity news for this week. Let's hop into the topic of the week. So topic of the week this week is going to look at the role of data privacy and the role of information security, and why they are the same but why they are different. In layman's terms, same but different. The reason I want to talk about this week, guys, is all around the NHS COVID-19 track and trace app. So if you haven't downloaded it, I do highly recommend you go and do your bit and download the app. Essentially, it's been developed by the government and relevant third parties to allow people or users to go to a restaurant, scan a code, and uses Bluetooth to kind of see who you've been near and who you've kind of connected around to alert you to the fact if you've been exposed to someone who is tested or is positive to COVID-19, and a whole lot of other things that kind of go with it. It is a great way that shows technology as an enabler in this pandemic. However, there are lots of people out there, and this is why I want to talk about it today, who are saying, I'm not going to download the COVID-19 track and trace app, the NHS app, because I don't want to give the government all of my data. And these are the same people who have signed up to Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, you name it, every bloody social media website under the sun, who, if you've seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, have been exposed to the amounts of data they've collected on you. This really sparked in my mind that there is a clear disparity between data privacy and security, and they both, like a Venn diagram, they meet in the middle but can also be poles apart, and one can hold another to account. Ollie, give me your best one sentence answer to what is data privacy.
Well, to my mind, data privacy is about protecting the rights of individuals and their data, and being clear about what you're using data for, assuring that data is used for that purpose in your organisation, and assuring the life cycle of it, that it is created, stored, processed and destroyed in the right way, and making sure that all of that fits within the legal framework that your organisation is working in.
I think that's bang on. Couldn't argue with that. Essentially, information security is related to the confidentiality, availability and integrity of the systems we own and manage that facilitate data and our day-to-day operations. So you can see there, within a sentence, they are very, very different. One is purely focused around legislation, the way data is stored, making sure it's used appropriately, almost agnostic to an IT system. And information security relates to the CIA, confidentiality, availability and integrity of the systems that process data and run business operations, etc. So as we have modernized in the world, and as the digital footprint has been growing and our digital shadow essentially is growing, you can see how data privacy has bled into information security and security operations and vice versa. You only have to watch a couple of documentaries on Netflix, like The Social Dilemma, the most recent one, and then the Great Hack, which is all about the Cambridge Analytica scam, to really understand the impact that data privacy and information security have on one another. Essentially, a hacker is going to want to get into your organization and steal what is valuable to you. In most cases, that is data. Now, we can put a load of IT systems in place that try and stop an attacker. However, from a data privacy point of view, there are ways in which we should be securing that, and there are ways in which that data should be separate and segregated and how it should be used. More often than not, if you're involved in a cybersecurity incident that deals with some form of related customer data or business financial sensitive information, the data privacy team are going to be involved. And under the regulation GDPR, a company has to have a named data privacy officer. If we dial back to kind of why I wanted to talk about this week, when you look at apps like the NHS, test and trace app, yes, you have to sign up and give some personal information over. Yes, it's going to collect information on you, where you've been, what you've been doing, who you've been in contact with. However, in most cases, that is very minimal data compared to what has already been collected on you on things like social media, browsers, and all these other, internet-connected devices that we've already mentioned before. What goes on in your mind when you think about data privacy and kind of information security together?
I think for a start, it's important to recognise and point out as well that that a large amount of the criticism of why people won't download the app. They may say it's under the guise of, because I don't want the government tracking me, but they are also the same people that are also saying that we shouldn't be locking down and we shouldn't be, testing people for coronavirus. I'm not necessarily coronavirus deniers, but people who are, people who are very much against the idea that the government is being a bit of a nanny state. They are often the same people who are saying, "Oh, I don't trust that app whilst we're on Facebook," because it's not about the app. It's because it's about their disagreement with the processes and options.
Political
that the government
view and political agenda. Yeah, it's politics, murky water. Yeah,
exactly. And half the problem with this is that somehow we've got in 2020 to a situation where we have managed to politicize a virus, and it's a bit mental, to be honest. But we are where we are. I think that there is another subsection of people who are concerned, not necessarily around the data that is collected, but perhaps the way it is collected or the way it is handled, or just the general security of the app. That is a different angle to the people who are, just worried about being tracked. I think there's different levels of people's concerns about this. Most of the concerns in the kind of cybersecurity world that I've seen are all people that are worried that the app was perhaps rushed out, not built very well, not really concentrating around the security of things, because it's all about delivering political purposes and political points and stuff, rather than delivering a solid, safe application. So I think it's actually quite complex around people's concerns with it.
Mm.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the problem is that the government haven't done themselves any favours. So, they started by completely going against the best advice of, every sort of privacy expert out there by developing originally an app that stored, that, kind of circumvented, if you like, the normal API, or the APIs on devices to kind of track raw data about devices that were seen, and then they were going to store this in a giant, great big database, and they were going to do various things with it. It's like, what could go wrong? And they've now 180'd on that and said, "Oh, okay, we will actually use the the kind of more privacy focused API that Apple and Google worked on," which is good. It's positive because it only releases information that's required and it tells you before it does it, and I think that's really good stuff. I think the problem is that the government have already burnt their bridges with it, by kind of not listening to expertise, and this is sort of, unfortunately, I think, one of the things we're seeing with the government that we've got at the moment, which is experts are sort of being seen as troublemakers, people who just want to be who just want to be sort of there to say something different or something against what they're trying to do. And I think like you say, well, the problem is it's become politicised, but then I suppose it always would have been in a sense. The app's been touted as world beating, and that's the best app that any country has, and this kind of stuff, and it clearly isn't.
Yeah.
I think it should just be. I mean, I guess, being a liberal of like the classic definition, I think it's just up to people whether they use it or not. Personally, I don't think I would use it because I don't really go anywhere.
I can see the gym
also,
behind you.
Yeah, exactly. I think in reality, just because I'm around somebody else who I happen to get a Bluetooth connection with doesn't mean I was next to them or near them, or it doesn't mean anything really. And so I think what would be really interesting is some transparency about what the accuracy of the app actually is and how well it's actually identifying people and how useful it's been. I don't expect we'll get to the bottom of it, but it would be useful to know. And I think the other problem is that the government don't have a great track record with use of data, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's kind of when they started sort of being very cagey about whether they were going to write into law that this data would only ever be used for COVID-19, and they said, oh no, we're not going to do that. It's when you kind of, when the alarm bells start ringing for me as well, why won't you just write that into law? That doesn't seem that contentious. You're only ever going to use it for this, for this purpose. So,
yeah, I totally agree. You mentioned two really good points there, which link back to the whole data privacy versus information security thing is. And the first one you said, it was about transparency, and a lot of data privacy's role is making a company be as transparent as possible with what they do with data. Data is the binary numbers that make us who we are nowadays. It is the valuable asset that we are as a human to an organization, our data. And transparency is so key, and a data privacy team are there to ensure that we are transparent with our data, we're only doing the right things for it. And the second point you mentioned there was all around understanding a little bit more about how the app works, and actually having that published in a easy to read, easy to understand kind of layman's guise. So what happens when I walk into a pub with the app installed on my phone? What is Bluetooth really doing at a simple level, and how does it, like you mentioned, how does it actually join the fact that I was in a pub near someone that has tested positive for coronavirus? And I think, Will mentioned some really good points there about lots of the early issues that were mentioned were about security of the app. It was rushed out, quickly developed. There are going to be security vulnerabilities there. And that's where this is where you can see in a real day-to-day scenario how data privacy and information security have kind of met in the middle in that Venn diagram, because we have an application running on a smartphone on an IT system that needs to be secured to make sure it can't be breached and that data can't be stolen from it, essentially. And then you have data privacy experts saying that you're doing the wrong thing or you're doing the right thing, and who are trying to protect the types of data that's collected and how it's collected. So if you're in an organization now, you're in a security team, a data privacy team, you're going to be working together closely for the foreseeable future. I say that. There's going to be a massive breach next week now, and I'm going to have to sit here and eat my hand, aren't I? We will end the topic of the week there and move swiftly on to our final segment, which is Secrets from the SOC. This week's Secrets from the SOC is going to take us into the future. Should I say back to the future? Is that too old school? This week we're going to be talking about security automation and the role that automation has in your day-to-day role within a SOC. If you haven't heard of this term before, there is an industry-known jargon called SOAR, SOAR, which stands for Security Orchestration Automation Response. Is that right? That's it. You saw me pause there. I really had to think about that. There's too many bloody acronyms. So at a high level, a SOAR solution are ones that promise to take your basic day-to-day tasks within a security operations center and automate them, making sure that your analyst's time is not wasted on simple, boring tasks that can be done by a machine, and they can focus on the more nitty-gritty stuff. But the real story in Secrets from the SOC this week is all about how products like SOAR solutions and automation are becoming ever more important within a security operations center. What is your take on automation firstly? Is this going to replace jobs? Will we see SOCs be smaller because of automation? And do you think it's an important factor that people take forward today?
I think the thing to think about is how busy, if you're working in a SOC at the moment, how busy are you? And my guess is going to be the answer is you're very busy, and you're overflowing with work to do. So like everything with automation, I think we shouldn't fear it, because it will come anyway. We should embrace it. We should do our best to use the best of it, and see it as an opportunity to, if you are working in a SOC and you're performing processes that you think are turn the handle, could be done repeatedly excuse me, very easily, then you're not probably going to be, you're not going to feel like you're bringing a huge amount of value potentially if you're just doing that work. Security, I said this before when I kind of when I was on before, actually, for my topic of the week, but security problems are solved by people, right? They're not going to be solved by algorithms or by automation. They'll be solved by people working together to pick through lists of legacy systems that need to be decommissioned and slowly get them off the network, and to kind of upgrade bits and pieces, to kind of really unpick those nitty-gritty problems that prevent people from securing their networks and systems. So I think SOAR is absolutely a good technology, something that people should embrace. And if you're in a SOC and you can identify those processes that can be automated, then it's a great thing to do.
I remember reading an article a while ago, and it was titled something like the top 10 jobs that will be, I won't say future-proof, but improving or increasing in the future. And I remember the article saying that some of the jobs that would be improving were more generalist security, information security sort of analysts that have a kind of larger picture of things, and they're making the kind of perhaps the higher level decisions. And humans aren't very good at analyzing deep data, so machines and automation is perfect for that kind of thing, but machines still can't make those contextualized decisions like we can. They still can't learn in quite the same manner that we can, and they can't communicate in the same manner that we can. And I think that's the big thing is you can have all the automation that you want, but you can't automate that communication, that human communication, which is vital during incidents. It's vital during building new products. It's vital during the day-to-day running of operations.
My suggestion would be, if you're looking to do automation, you would love to dabble in maybe trying to automate a very simple process within your security operations center. A good security analyst will learn and understand some form of programming language. Personally, I think Python is the easiest. Some may disagree with me, and there are plenty of others you can learn there. But guys, what would you recommend for a junior analyst who wants to, dip their toe into automation to make sure they're kind of future-proofing themselves? What would you suggest that they do?
I think that, like you said, Python is a good shout, but there's quite a few kind of data science courses out there which are free. And okay, yes, some of them do teach the kind of the important aspects of Python, but they teach how to analyze data as well from a very basic kind of skill level. And being able to analyze data is actually a human skill. That you then can augment and hopefully work with and improve with automation. But at the start, it needs to be a human skill, and you need to learn that analytical mindset.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, completely agree. I think there's two things for me. First is basically security people will need to become developers. So whichever language you learn something and get an appreciation for how to write, sort of fairly good quality code. I think it matters a little bit less what you pick. I think once you've learned one programming language, I think a lot of knowledge is very transferable once you understand sort of some of the fundamentals. And actually, like Will says, like data is the key, right? If you can't understand what data model you're working to, how best to classify stuff, how to codify everything, you're going to get into a big mess. And so I think those two things are two things that are kind of your accessories, your things that you should be learning about on the sidelines, as well as security, to really help your career in the future, because it's all going to be about integration, systems talking to each other, you building those integrations, bolting bits on where stuff doesn't quite, add up and line up.
So I guess at a higher level, it is understanding the numbers that are in front of you and learning the technology to crunch those numbers for you. Anyway, guys, that wraps up the podcast for this week. Thank you so much for being on. Ollie, it's great to have you again, as always. And Alex, you traitor, we hope you're having a great holiday. We look forward to having you back on. But let us wrap up the podcast with our key takeaways from this week.
My key takeaway is going to be around what we just spoke about. So, if you are coming into the industry, or if you are, early doors in the industry, it's an absolutely perfect time to start getting your head around, data science. There are loads of courses out there, free ones especially, that can help you get that kind of introduction.
I would say make sure you're supplementing your information security learning with some kind of more traditional development learning as well. I think it's useful on two fronts. I think you learn a bit about how developers work, and you are going to end up having to work with development teams. So it's good to understand the language that they're using, what they mean when they say, Scrum, Agile, all those kinds of, buzzwords that might sound like buzzwords, but actually are things that are running development teams these days. Just kind of make sure that you've got some sort of, accessory interests, things that build other skills that are going to be useful and transferable into your security career.
And my key takeaway for this week relates to QR codes, a potential emerging threat with the ability for scanning a QR code to complete various operations on your smartphone. Maybe try it. Custom create a QR code, stick it up in your office, see how many people scan it. Is this a valid threat? Watch out for those QR codes up in pubs, and just stay frosty, guys. But thank you all for listening. We'd love to hear from you. If you guys have any questions, queries or stories you want to send us, do email us at info@hackableu.com. I'd like to thank Ollie and Will for joining us, and we will catch you all in the next episode.